Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Buckley. Thank you for joining us for our Coastal Rail Resiliency Update, Coastal Rail Resiliency Study Update. I'm going to go through some introductions briefly, and then a little bit more housekeeping items, and then we'll begin our presentation. In addition to me, and I oversee public outreach at OCTA, we have Rebecca Soto, who is the project manager for the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study itself. And on our technical team, we have George Roska, Avi Shah, and Russ Boudreau. And the five of us will be making our presentation, and then we'll take questions after that. But right now, I'm going to hand it off to Nancy Verduzco, who is going to talk a little bit about our interpretation.
Hello, everyone. As Chris mentioned, we do have Spanish interpretation available today. At this moment, I invite you all to please select the language of your choice, English or Spanish. You can do so by clicking on the interpretation icon that is located at the bottom of your screen. You can also find this under the More settings if you do not see that icon. I'll give you a few moments to do that. Hola, bienvenidos. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos hoy. Antes de que empiece la presentación, les vamos a dar información para participar. Hoy tenemos interpretación al español disponible. Si gustan escuchar la presentación en español, por favor seleccione el icono de interpretación que se encuentra debajo de su pantalla. También lo puede encontrar en la sección que dice More. Gracias. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Nancy. Much appreciated. So we had a meeting yesterday in person in San Clemente at the City Hall, well attended, and we have this virtual meeting for those of you who prefer this style or who couldn't make yesterday's meeting. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to participate to the greatest extent possible. We ask that you respect the format of the meeting. We'll be taking questions through the Q&A button. We'll talk a little bit about more about that in a second. And then just want everybody to be respectful. All comments that anybody has, you address it directly to the panel, not to anybody else who's submitted their questions. And we'll just keep it respectful, and we'll be good. Next slide. So here's a little bit about how we want you to be able to participate. If you are joining us via the web, you'll be able to raise your hand to provide questions and comments. Do you have comments? You can type your comment. Just click on the Q&A function, and you'll be able to do that. We ask that if you would include your contact information, including your name, and if you belong to any organization. When announced, we'll ask you to unmute your audio, and then you can ask your question or questions. And then we'll re-mute you once we've heard that from you, and then we'll respond. If you're calling in by phone, you're going to press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand, and you'll be announced by the last 4 digits of your phone number. And then you'll press *6 to unmute your audio. And then again, you'll be remuted once you've completed your comment or asked your question. Just as a reminder, the chat function is going to be used by our team exclusively to share information and links to resources, right? So that's where you'll find links to, say, the fact sheet or Q&A, the website, etc. Next. So at this moment, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca Soto, the project manager for the study, to walk through this first few set of slides.
Thank you, Chris. So just very quickly, again, I just want to thank everybody for their time today. Before I get into the rest of the presentation, I do just want to take a moment to remind everybody that today's public meeting is focused on the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, which that project is intended to evaluate strategies that could help protect the approximately 7 miles of existing rail corridor between Dana Point and the San Diego County line for up to the next 30 years. That's the objective of this particular study. And it doesn't approve a construction project. It does not select one solution for the entire corridor either. And it doesn't determine today what will be built at any particular location. So instead, I want everybody to think of this study as providing a toolbox or a menu of potentially feasible options that could be applied throughout the study area. The next steps would involve determining whether and where particular concepts might make sense, developing more detailed engineering, identifying potential costs and funding sources, as well as establishing priorities. I also want to take a moment to just highlight that we have been working with the county as well as the coastal cities, including the cities of San Clemente and Dana Point, our state partners, as well as the California Coastal Commission, as well as a variety of technical and environmental experts throughout this process. And additionally, we have been participating in discussions within the County of Orange, South Orange County Beach Coalition, which also includes the cities of San Clemente and Dana Point. And through that group, we are all working together on a master inventory of the status of sand depth on our beaches, which will ultimately allow us to create an annual sand retention and replenishment plan in partnership with our local agency partners. So again, this has been a very collaborative process, and I'm very thankful for everybody's participation through this process. That being said, let's take a look at the different coastal rail remediation efforts that have been kind of going on. On your screen here, you see 4 different columns, starting at the column on the far left, titled Emergency Rail Projects. These are past emergency rail projects. For as long as the rail corridor has been there, or the railroad rather has been there, there have always been periodic disruptions in service. However, within the last few years, there has been a pretty significant uptick in disruptions due to the ongoing impacts of coastal erosion. You can see some of those major emergency rail projects listed there. And so those came first. And after all of these series of emergency rail projects, it became apparent that this is an issue that is not going to go away, and it will be an ongoing challenge. So that brings us to the next set of efforts here, the Coastal Rail Stabilization Priority Project, or the 4 hotspot areas you've heard us talking about many times. This refers to the emergency areas 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those were earlier on in this process, those 4 areas were identified as immediate needs. They were categorized as an emergency by the OCTA Board of Directors. And so we began pursuing the emergency sort of pathway to address those immediate needs. And those emergency, that emergency work remains ongoing today until we complete that. That being said, I do just want to take a moment to provide just a very brief overview. I think most of us know that there have been a lot of high tide events occurring over the last few weeks, late July, and then through this month as well. We've seen up to 8-foot swells of waves overtopping our rail line, with freight service interrupted intermittently, as well as some slow orders issued for passenger rail, resulting in some displacement of existing material, which threatened to undermine the rail subgrade. So in response to that, we notified the California Coastal Commission of the emergency repair work needed to address that. And so we moved forward. We placed approximately 1,200 tons of riprap to restore and stabilize those areas affected by the riprap displacement as a result of those the high tide events. As far as the sand tied to those emergency projects, that would be the 540,000 cubic yards of sand. OCTA remains in the process to get that environmentally cleared and permitted, and that work is ongoing as well. So back to our remediation efforts here. The first two columns are kind of focus on the sort of immediate needs, the emergencies, right? Where we were in a reactive position. Moving to this study now, which is kind of highlighted in red here, the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. Through this study, we are trying to shift to a more proactive position and get ahead of what we know will eventually require work to stabilize and protect the railroad, but we want to get away from the emergency pathway just because it is far more time consuming, and expensive. And so we want to make sure that we're being proactive as opposed to reactive. So this is what we're attempting to do with this study. It is a one step of a very much longer process. Essentially, here we are at the planning feasibility level. And at this level, we essentially had several, there was like upwards of 20 different concepts broken down by 3 different categories. There were railside concepts, bluffside concepts, as well as beachside concepts. We went through a scoring and evaluation process to get us to a short list of concepts to be carried forward for further analysis, as well as eventual project development upon completion of the study in the future, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then lastly, we have the Coastal Rail Long-Term Solution Study. This is the long-term solution study that the state has made it very clear that they will be taking the lead on. Through that study, they will be taking a look at what needs to be done to protect the railroad in place beyond that 30 year. So they'll be taking a look at that. I don't have that study has not commenced yet. So at this time it's TBD, but we should see that effort begin to kind of get the ball rolling on that here. But in the meantime, we need to make sure that we are protecting the infrastructure that is currently there. And so that's what this study aims to do. Next slide, please. So through this study, we have produced the draft feasibility report, which is here. This is just a very high level overview of what is in that report. And the report is available as well for the public to take a look at. But essentially, it includes these key components. We have the study approach, how we got here, what our goals are, our alternative concept development, how we ended up with 3 rail concepts, or excuse me, how we started off with 3 rail concepts, 9 bluffside concepts, as well as 11 beachside concepts, and narrowed it down to that short list I mentioned. Our screening and evaluation process, those shortlisted concepts, as well as the community, environmental, and recreational considerations, as well as next steps, which involves funding strategies, federal partnership opportunities, as well as what the traditional pathway for project development is anticipated to look like. Next slide, please. And so again, this has been a very collaborative process over the course of this study. Beginning in early 2024, we hosted a series of focus meetings. The focus meetings involved regulatory agencies, the California Coastal Commission, the U.S. Army Corps, the county, as well as associated entities, state parks, various HOAs, LoSAN, Metrolink, as well as members of the public as well. So on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see the sort of summarized general feedback that we have received. And so I want to just acknowledge that we have heard the strong support for sand nourishment and the desire for reoccurring placement to be integrated into sand retention strategies. We've also heard concerns that shoreline protection structures will permanently eliminate sandy beaches. And we've also heard the desire for more clarity on long-term planning and rail relocation. In response to that feedback that we've received, we have added a one-time sand nourishment to all shoreline protection structure concepts. So if there's hard armoring involved, it will come with sand. As well as we've provided additional conceptual design to be included in the draft feasibility report, as well as providing more information on the next steps upon completion of this study. And I will take a moment to just acknowledge. So when you see here that we've added a one-time sand nourishment to all shoreline protection structure concepts, I want to reiterate two things. So one, this one-time sand nourishment that we reference here is in addition to the 540,000 cubic yards of sand that are tied to those 4 emergency projects that OCTA has committed to. We are currently in the process of advancing that. So any sand nourishment that comes out of this study would be in addition to that. And then secondly is that, again, this study at this point doesn't recommend or approve specific projects. We're not there yet. That will ultimately be part of the next steps. So any projects that ultimately come out of here, whether it's, it could be more than one depending on how they're packaged, those would come with their own one-time sand nourishment. So I just want to make that clear, that this study isn't intended to preclude us, when I say us, OCTA, from ever pursuing or supporting the pursuit of sand. So just want to make that clear. Next slide, please. And again, this just is a high-level alternative concept development process that we've undergone. The 4 boxes that you see generally represent the key milestones of this study and where we have engaged the community and our stakeholders for input and feedback, as well as providing future community input opportunities. So as you can see, we are towards the tail end of this process here. We are requesting your feedback on the shortlisted concepts, and as well as kind of moving this on to the next steps for further evaluation. Next slide, please. As a quick refresher, the 2 rail concepts that the study ultimately recommends to be carried forward are alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure to reduce those life cycle costs, as well as ground improvement efforts. The 2 bluffside concepts to be carried forward involve catchment walls, as well as tiebacks / soil / nail pin pile walls. And then for the 4 beachside concepts to be carried forward, and again, these all include a one-time beach nourishment with each shoreline protection structure. So that would be riprap, engineered rock revetment, seawall, or a combination of any of the above. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Avi Shah, who will go over these concepts in a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So I just want to dive in a little bit deeper on some of these shortlisted concepts. So we have 3 categories that Rebecca described. So first, for our rail concepts, the ground improvement looks at, it helps stabilize the track bed in areas where we've seen severe drainage issues. And we can do that with the installation of soil columns that add competent soil and stabilize that track bed. So it really helps deal with ongoing maintenance issues, issues with our ballast and ties. So this competent soil will help solidify and help stabilize our track bed. Next, I'd like to discuss our bluffside concepts. The first one here is the catchment walls. The catchment walls are intended in areas that are experiencing surficial failures along the bluff. And the catchment wall is constructed at or near the railroad right-of-way, and its intent is to catch any sort of debris that may be following onto our tracks and impacting our railroad operations. It just serves as a physical barrier from that debris entering the railroad right-of-way. Improves safety and provides ongoing operations for the railroad. The next concept here are the tieback walls. So these are usually used for deeper seated landslides, and it utilizes a steel tieback anchor that's drilled into the soil or behind a wall, and it's intended to resist the earth pressures in order to basically pin that slope down into the competent earth. Again, this addresses issues where we see landslides happening from underneath the railroad and that are pushing the railroad in one direction, help stabilize that. Next, we have the soil nail pin pile walls. These are intended for slightly shallower landslide plains that we have seen in some of the bluffs near Dana Point and San Clemente. And this concept consists of either soil nails or pin piles that utilize piles that are driven into the ground, either at an angle or vertically, to resist lateral soil movement and provide slope stabilization. The pins or piles are drilled through that failure plane in order to meet into that competent earth. And then I'll move to our beachside concepts. So again, each of these concepts, of the 4 shortlisted concepts, they will be paired with a one-time sand nourishment. Our first concept here is the riprap restoration. And the intent here is to reinforce the existing rock embankment that has either become oversteepened or we've experienced rock that's fallen out of place. The rock is strategically placed in order to maintain adequate points of contact, and that creates a much more stable track embankment. Next is the engineered revetment. Sorry, can we go back one slide there? The engineered revetment shore protection is a little bit more robust of a riprap section where we have features like a filter fabric, a smaller rock underlayer with a larger armor rock stone on top. It's typically buried, the toe is typically buried and keyed in, which provides additional stability and scour protection to our track embankment. Then next we have our seawall shore protection, and this is a vertical element or structure, and that's intended to protect the track embankment from scour, erosion, and wave overtopping. And it's intended to minimize the horizontal footprint placed within the rail right-of-way. Concept, the seawall with the revetment shore protection is similar. It's kind of a combination of the seawall and the engineered revetment where we're providing additional scour protection at the toe of the wall. So those, again, 4 concepts would be paired with that one-time sand nourishment. Now, as a part of the study, as we came up with these shortlisted concepts, we evaluated them on several different criteria to score them, and these were the ones that were shortlisted based on that scoring. And then we performed a hazards assessment too. So if you go to the next slide. So here we looked at the bluffs along the 7-mile coastal rail corridor, and we assessed risk based on the bluff proximity to our railroad, what historical geotechnical data that we have, and existing bluff erosion that we're seeing occur that may become a threat to the railroad and having debris fall onto the railroad or impact the railroad track bed. So we've tried to scale that in terms of risk, and those are highlighted here. And then next, I'll pass it to Russ here to provide an overview of the coastal rail risk assessment.
Sure. So in addition to the bluff hazard assessment that Avi just described, the team also performed pretty much a high-level coastal hazards assessment for the rail corridor. And basically what we did is we took 3 pretty basic hazard score components. One is just how much sand at the time was presently in front of the particular location of the rail corridor. The amount of sand represents kind of the natural shore protection that's there. The next parameter is, but then how is that changing? Is that an area where the shoreline is eroding or stable or maybe accreting? And then finally, the third component is just what's the existing level of shore protection? For example, in 2025, there was riprap repair conducted up between North Beach and Linda Lane. So that would have a certain, reduced risk because it's recently repaired. There's other areas which presently have little to no shore protection, and so that would be more of a higher risk area. And so the results come together to come to this ranking, and the high risk areas, which are shown kind of in more of a reddish color, are where we would be looking at applying the shortlisted alternative concepts for the B-side alternatives.
Okay, so on this slide, we have the general sort of study schedule. So as you can see, we are in the draft feasibility study report phase. We released the draft feasibility report last month on July 6th for our Regional Transportation Planning Committee. And then we will be providing an update to our board this month on August 24th as well. And during this month and over the next few weeks, we will be continue to obtain feedback from public stakeholders as well as other interest groups through the rest of this summer, and then eventually work to finalize and publish the final version of that report, which we anticipate in late fall 2026. Next slide, please. And finally, this timeline that you see here generally represents the traditional pathway to project development I mentioned earlier on in our presentation. So as you can see here, it is very much an involved process. So what happens next essentially is that the recommendations that come out of the study, those shortlisted concepts that we've overviewed, upon completion of the study, they will be handed off to our capital group. And what they'll do is they'll then go through the process to identify the project-specific locations to implement the different shortlisted concepts, some early design to determine the specs. So while at this point, we can't say where, when, and how big and how long like a seawall would be exactly. It is during this phase that something like that would be determined. And the same thing with the sand. So going back to the sand nourishment that will ultimately be tied to the projects that come out of this study. And more than likely, it's not just going to be one big project that comes out. This study will yield few different projects, like I mentioned, packaged together depending on area or priority or however our experts determine that those projects need to be packaged. And then we can put together all of the specs I mentioned. At that point, we would determine how much sand would be part of that project. We'd put together the budget and identify the funding sources accordingly. And then it would go through the rest of this sort of project development process that includes the environmental approval process as well as permitting. We have to go after funding. We have to get the funding. And then that ultimately will get us through to construction. So again, I want to be very clear that while at this moment, the study doesn't recommend any specific projects. It's setting it's kind of giving us a good starting point for project development. And so any specific project proposed in the future would have to go through these additional steps ahead. And again, each project would require its own environmental review, continued public outreach, along with any necessary permits and approvals through the California Coastal Commission, as well as other appropriate regulatory agencies. So with that, I believe this concludes our presentation, but I'm going to hand it back to Chris to facilitate the Q&A session here.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Avi. Thank you, Russ. So I want to reiterate how to participate. But first, just a note, you can see in the chat, the webinar chat, a link to a handout that we've provided for this meeting, but also a link to the draft feasibility report. You can also find on the octa.net/CRRS. You can find a link to the this presentation, so you'd be able to see that there. Let's move on to questions and comments. How to participate. If you are joining us via the web and you want to make a comment, you want to click raise hand under participants. You can see it just to the right of that. You want to type a comment, you can actually type a comment into the Q&A using the Q&A function. That's where we'll be looking for comments and questions. If you would, we'd like you to include your name and organization, if any. And for those who want to make verbal comments, we'll ask you to unmute your audio when we announce your name. Then you can ask your question, make your comment, and then we'll remute you once you have completed that. If you're on the phone and calling in, we have a couple of phone call people on phone. Press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. You'll be announced using the last 4 digits of your phone number. Then press *6 once you hear that to unmute your audio. Make your comments, ask your question. You'll be remuted once you've completed that. And as a reminder, chat is for resources that we'll be sharing with you. Q&A is for questions and answers that you would like us to, questions rather that you would like us to take, or comments that you'd like to make. I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one. Yes, a reminder that we have a lot of people on. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak who wants to. So at the moment, we're limiting comments to 2 minutes. Questions, comments, anything you'd like to share with us. The first one we have, I'm going to read off. It comes from Dennis Bress. He's a resident of Newport Beach, wants to thank us for the hard work in keeping the rail line functioning, the Lausanne rail line functioning. The opportunity to go from he says he was on Amtrak 591 from San Diego Old Town to Irvine yesterday at 7 p.m. and the sunset was epic. I agree. I was out there watching the sun myself. It was pretty amazing. He continues, as you know, this rail link is vital to all communities up and down the coast, especially Orange County riders and commuters, to make it to South County cities, South cities, all the way down to San Diego. Knowing of the work being done, interrupting Metrolink passage currently, we're grateful that Amtrak is still able to make the passage. Rail is vital, and we value your hard work. Thank you, Dennis. We really appreciate the comment. The next comment is actually a question from Leslie Meyerhoff. And Leslie, I believe you're with the city of San Clemente. The question is, what level of design do the coastal rail resiliency study concepts reflect? Is that something?
Yeah, Chris, I could take that.
Okay.
Yeah. So at this time, this is a feasibility study, meaning that these would be at a conceptual level, and no further than that. So these are pre any kind of having, hard surveying information of, the existing topography and things like that. So we are looking at concepts that have been used in the industry in similar applications, and that would be then evaluated against each other as we have done through the screening criteria that we had used. So everything is at a conceptual level.
Thanks, George. We have another comment from someone who's choosing to remain anonymous. It says, if you plan to add sand after hard armoring, it won't work. Why not start with sand? Is that something, George, you want to take, or Russ, would that be something you'd handle?
Yeah, I'll take that, Chris. So yeah, no, that's a very good question. And at a high level, when we are looking at the purpose and need of this particular study, which is to maintain the railroad operations for the next 30 years within the existing railroad right-of-way, and as we are looking at the regulatory environment for any of these options, And then we also have to look at our own right of way, what could be done there, because OCTA does not have jurisdiction beyond their property lines. So we are looking at both not just the rock options, but with every single beachside concept, sand was included in every one of them. And I think, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, that's on top of the 540,000 cubic yards that is already part of the priority projects with the 4 areas that are moving forward.
Great, thank you, George. I'm going to move to those people who have their hand raised and would like to make their comments verbally. First would be Sheila Herbert.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I was curious why jetties weren't considered on the short list. I'm obviously not an engineer experienced. I just live in San Clemente and really enjoy, the coastline and everything it has to offer. But from what I understand, that can trap sand really well and create a beach, and that would ultimately protect the train. So I was just curious from the engineering perspective and everything, why jetties are, especially in South San Clemente, aren't considered. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, I could take this one. So just real brief, and then I want to pass it over to Russ. So we had an extensive number of alternatives that we went through, and Russ will explain on how as those beachside alternatives went through the evaluation process and the screening criteria that was used, why the jetties didn't necessarily make it to those top 4. Russ?
Yeah, excuse me, really good question. And there's a lot of discussion about using sand retention to basically extend the life of beach nourishment and hold sand on the beach longer. And sand retention was considered at a high level at the beginning of this study, and it was not carried forward as one of the top coastal or beachside alternatives for a couple reasons. One is just, again, the primary focus is the protection of the railroad, and the level of what we understand and the type of studies and effort that would go into planning and designing an appropriate sand retention system, where it's as a jetty, or I think maybe you're thinking more of a groin, which basically is a short particular structure to hold sand, or whether it's an offshore breakwater or a reef. It takes years and years of study and investigation to make sure what you design or put in works how you want it to. And we felt as OCTA that that's more of a broader regional type of problem to wrestle with, but it was considered, but just we're not there at this point to recommend any type of a sand retention system for the protection of the railroad.
Great, thank you, Russ. Next up, Brian Yanity. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us all. My name is Brian Yanity. I'm Vice President South of the Rail Passenger Association of California and Nevada, and we are a big supporter of the Amtrak Pacific Surfliner and Metrolink service, obviously on the Lausanne corridor through San Clemente. There are thousands who ride on the trains every day through San Clemente, and according to the managing director's report at last month's board meeting of the Lausanne Rail Corridor Agency, in June 2026, Pacific Surfliner ridership was the highest for any month in the history of the Lausanne Agency. It was 63% higher than June 2025, and in that month in 2025, the track was closed for the last week of that. So you can see how the track closures influence ridership. But the June 2026 number was 19% greater than June 2019. And since March 2026, ridership and revenue of the Amtrak Pacific Surfliner has outtrended pre-COVID ridership. So ridership is increasing. It's becoming increasingly important to Southern California and not less. So we do need to protect the rail line. And myself and my organization, we are not experts in physical oceanography or this kind of civil engineering work, so we don't really have comments on the actual revetments and so forth. We just want the rail line protected. But one thing I would like to ask, and this is not my area of expertise, of course, has there been underwater reefs considered, like rocks, like offshores, kind of underwater breakwaters? I heard that's a way to, naturally have sand collect, but you can't even see it if it's underwater. Um, that's just a question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chris, I will hand this question off to Russ, our coastal expert. Russ, if you want to chime in on this one.
Yeah, it basically the last answer kind of covers it. It's a really good comment, and offshore reefs are considered as part of sand retention measures. And so for the reasons why they weren't carried forward in this particular study were discussed. There's a lot we really need to learn about how to make an offshore reef perform as we want it to, which is retain sand, but also make sure it doesn't have any negative effects that aren't anticipated. There's a lot of valuable resources in the nearshore area. And so that just seemed like something that the broader region should address. And there are plans underway currently doing that.
Thank you, Russ. Don't go too far. We're going to turn to the Q&A. We've got Eric Holmes. He notes that his concern is that each beachside strategy involves armoring along with sand nourishment. And he's concerned that armoring will just strip what is placed there in terms of the sand. Could you respond to that for us?
Yeah, Russ, if you're
sure, yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to. That really good question and a comment and a concern. What the goal is here, as we've been talking about, is to protect the railroad. And so we kind of describe this almost as like a buried shore protection. We do riprap to protect the railroad, which has been done for a long, long time to make sure that the railroad corridor is stabilized. But then now we're talking about putting sand in addition to that, basically to bury the shore protection. And that way the shore protection represents more of like a last line of defense or an insurance policy that when you do need that, because sand does come and some sand does go, that you have that protection and we don't lose the railroad, which is the primary focus of this study right now. I think that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Russ. Appreciate that. Also on the Q&A side, we have Charles Jones, who says, with the contemplated remediation efforts, what do you anticipate as the lifespan of these efforts?
Yeah.
We take that one? Thanks, George.
Yeah. So the study is considering all of these concepts to take us at least for the next 30 years. And that's not necessarily when any one of these would fail, so to speak. It's not necessarily a hard and fast design life of every concept, but we want to make sure that at a minimum, it takes us at least to 30 years because as the state is embarking on their long-term study, we know that some of those longer-term solutions are going to take that long to go into effect. So one of the main points of the short and midterm study is to make sure that we get the lifespan long enough to where there is time to implement any long-term solutions.
Thank you, George. Much appreciated. I'm going to turn back to people with their hands raised. Looks like we have Kieran McGuire. Kieran, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Chris. I guess I'm a San Clemente resident of 7 years and have been visiting the area for twice that long. I guess something that I've heard repeated several times during the course of this is that our primary focus is protecting the railroad. Respectfully, my primary focus is protecting my town and my beaches. It's why I moved here. It's the economic engine of this city. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to show how important our beaches and the beach lifestyle and the surf here contributes to our local economy. And, when I see riprap being used as one of the mechanisms to meet your primary objective, I think there's a significant amount of evidence that suggests, and visual evidence that I've seen and witnessed since I've lived here, that riprap produces, like reduces the sand on our beaches. And so, one of the things that is in this proposal is apparently one-time sand replenishment. And, someone was careful to note that doesn't mean there wouldn't be future sand replenishment, and that there's other sand replenishment that's happening. But that's not really the same as committing to ongoing sand replenishment, which is what I think as a resident of this town is what I'd want to see funded by OCTA to make sure that your goal of protecting your railroad doesn't result in the loss of the lifestyle of this town, why we all live here. So I'd like you to comment a little bit on why you think a one-time sand replenishment is a defensible strategy, when we all know that sand's going to get blasted out of here over time.
Rebecca, can you jump in on that one, please?
Sure. Well, so I guess there's some different moving pieces here, and I'll try to be brief. But we collectively view the challenges associated with coastal erosion as a regional issue, which is why collaboration with our local, state, and federal partners is critical. From a practical standpoint, even if we wanted to just do away with all the hard armoring and just start with sand only today, there's a lot of challenges associated with that. Some of them we've touched on. We are, as an owner of the right-of-way, we have purview over that. But beyond our right-of-way, it gets very complex, and there's a lot of different moving pieces that we have to work with other agencies to do that. When it comes to sand in particular, the challenge that we have is that the coastal environment at large is very uncertain. We've got, just even recently with all of the high tide events, we've got super El Nino coming. And even with recent sand nourishment projects that we've seen, we are advancing large sand nourishment ourselves as part of our emergency projects as well. It is a very, very time-consuming process. So if we know, for instance, that we've got super El Nino coming this winter, right? Our railroad is at risk. There's a lot of concern there in the different level of need throughout the corridor, right? There is no way that we could get enough sand to protect the railroad in place within the year. It's just with the environmental approvals, the permitting required, regulatory agencies have to be involved in all of that, plus the funding and the logistics. There's a lot of challenges that make looking at sand only from a transportation perspective challenging. And to that point, because we are a transportation agency, we have to be careful because the funding that we have is tied to transportation projects. We can't take transportation funding and spend it on other things. So there's that process as well. So as a whole, there's a lot of challenges associated, and we are trying to be good stewards and a good regional partner by doing what we can do to contribute towards sand nourishment where we can, while also maintaining our focus on our railroad infrastructure.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that very much. I'm going to turn back to the Q&A, and Michelle Sinning has questions that are sort of very similar. Most of what you said answers that, our approach to sand. The question that maybe we want to try to take a look at is, she notes that OCTA's CEO at our last meeting on this issue in July, earlier in July at the Regional Transportation Planning Committee meeting, our CEO indicated that ongoing sand replenishment was outside the scope of what a transportation agency could accommodate. You addressed that, Rebecca, in your response to the last question. The question here is, if that is the limitation, why couldn't OCTA pause this study long enough to develop an MOU or other partnership with the City of San Clemente or another agency, an agency that can address the ongoing sand component? Do you want to take that?
Sure. And truthfully, I think the answer to that question kind of falls along the same vein of what I was saying before. We could get into an MOU with our local partners today, but does that mean that we would have sand on the beaches in time before more erosion takes place and we've got, rail operations and safety compromised during that time? So there's a timing element in here. And even then to get together with other agencies to put together an MOU, that takes time in and of itself. We have to put that together. All of the respective agencies who are party to it have to get their own respective approvals. It's not a quick turnaround process. And then even once we get that in place, we still have to go through the process to not only find the sand that we need, we have to make sure that it meets several different standards as required by regulatory agencies. Then we have to figure out how we're going to fund it. Then we have to figure out how we're going to get it to the different places. And is there even enough quantity? Is there a large enough quantity of sand to do all of that? Those are all of the challenges associated with this. And again, this is why it's a regional collaborative process. OCTA is one of several agencies working to put sand on the beaches. So I just want to make it clear, there's us, the City of San Clemente has its own program. The County of Orange has the South Orange County Beach Coalition that's focusing as well. So there's a lot of different moving pieces here that makes it difficult for OCTA to come in and get everybody in an MOU and then get sand on the beach tomorrow. It unfortunately is a much more involved and time-consuming process that everybody has to go through regardless. So I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Rebecca. Second part of Michelle's comment here, I want to make sure I get in here. I think the question there is why eliminate a sand-focused alternative, which I think we've talked about, rather than carrying it forward into the PSR stage. Given that the community preference and the substantially lower permanent impact of sand replenishment she would strongly encourage OCTA to carry Alternative 5 forward, which is a looked at sand, at least through the PSR stage, rather than eliminating it now. We appreciate that comment. We went through a very extensive scoring process, which is detailed in the report itself. You'll be able to see that in the draft study, and it indicates a lot of the discussion behind why that it reflects a lot of discussion behind why that particular alternative concept is not being carried forward. And I think it's important to reiterate that while I think Kieran mentioned this, that he has a different objective. We have to focus on the purpose of this study, which is absolutely, focused on stabilizing the rail line, the railroad, between now and up to the next 30 years. We have that responsibility to ensure safety for passengers and freight, and that's got to be the focus of the study for us. I'm going to come back to hands raised. Mitch Silverstein, can you please unmute yourself and go ahead and offer your comment or question, please?
Yeah, Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Silverstein, I'm with Surfrider Foundation, California Policy Senior Coordinator. Appreciate the opportunity to comment. Really, Surfrider opposes this continued armoring of San Clemente beaches to protect the railroad, and strongly feels with the science behind it that continuing this approach will result not only in the loss of the beach that we love, but it will also fail to protect the rail corridor. And that's kind of what my I have a couple questions, but the question I have is kind of what I don't see in the study is really that nexus between a healthy beach and a protected rail corridor not really being studied. I actually, we disagree with the conclusion that these proposed measures would protect the railroad for 30 years, regardless of beach width. Also, we disagree that one-time standard punishments would be sufficient as sea levels continue to rise. The problem is that, and we see this so clearly at Cypress Shores, where the beach is completely been destroyed due to the haphazard placement of emergency armoring. What happens when the waves hit the armoring is that they reflect that energy right back out. So we lose the sand faster, and a deeper trough begins to develop at the toe of that revetment. What that trough does is it deepens the sea level, and it brings the destructive power of the ocean. It brings those waves closer to the armoring that you're trying to put to protect the railroad itself. So, I think I've heard Save Our Beaches call this a doom loop, because basically it creates an endless cycle of armoring, then beach loss, then waves coming closer to the railroad tracks, and then the need for more armoring, often through emergencies. So my question is, has that really been studied? Because I feel like you have great engineers, but they're not necessarily coastal engineers, and you're kind of missing this, that the sand replenishment and plus nature-based solutions can really help retain that beach. And then my last question is, how can OCTA better partner with the region on focusing on the sand replenishment and this timely bureaucratic process that Ms. Soto was talking about? Thinking outside the box, what would solve that? Even if it was like state legislation to make it easier to do this.
Thanks, Nick.
And also, yeah.
I want to get to responses. We've got a lot of other comments and several questions. So let me ask Russ to respond to your first question, if we could.
Yeah, Mitch, that was kind of a lengthy question. Maybe just reiterate the first question. I'll do my best to answer it.
Thanks. I'm wondering if OCTA, if y'all have really looked at the nexus between armoring the beach and then how that armoring actually exacerbates beach loss, creates a trough at the toe of the revetment, and then brings those waves that the armoring is meant to protect even closer to the railroad that it's meant to protect.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, that is a really, really important consideration. And I think we all see that the thing that has triggered this problem has been, just kind of a deficit in sediment on the beaches. And let's just take, for example, the how wide the beach was at Cypress Shore until what was it, 2016 or something like that. The beach was 100 feet wide, and we didn't have a problem like this at all. And also, then due to a shift in maybe wave climate and wave angle or something like that, all of a sudden we lost a lot of that sand really quickly. But until the sand was lost at that location, the breaking wave didn't know that shore protection was there because it was buried. But once it was exposed, yes, that does create some impacts such as wave reflections and taking up, space that would otherwise be occupied by sandy beach. So I think the point I'm driving at is the problem here was caused by just a net deficit in the sand volume, and then it exposed the revetment, and we're in this kind of do loop that none of us want to be in. So let's maybe as a region do our best to get some more sand back on the beach. OCTA has indicated a willingness to participate and support it financially, but it just can't be all on the shoulders of OCT alone.
Thank you, Russ. All right, I'm going to turn back to the Q&A. Comment from Thomas Smith. As a resident of Los Angeles, I would just like to state that I support any and all efforts to improve the protection of the low sand rail line through San Clemente. A return of long-term rail line closures would be disastrous. I think that any potential negative environmental effects of these protection efforts are substantially outweighed by the environmental benefits of reliable rail service along the low sand corridor. Thank you, Thomas. David, you are essentially asking, you have some concerns with respect to the criteria matrix that was used. I'd refer you to the report. There's a link in the chat if you're looking for access to the criteria matrix itself. We will nonetheless, of course, capture your comment. I just want to let everybody know we're going to go for about another 15 minutes. We have several more comments and questions. I'm going to turn back to the people who want to speak to us. But if you have comments that you'd like to make and you don't get on, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We will capture them at that point, of course, and ensure that we're able to include your feedback. Right now, I'm going to go to Michaela Coates. Michaela, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Michaela, and I'm here on behalf of the Surfrider Foundation South Orange County chapter. What I have to say might be a little bit repetitive of Mitch, but I just want to recognize that Surfrider recognizes the importance of this rail corridor, but we believe that protecting the railroad cannot come at the expense of destroying the very beach that surrounds it and the beaches that ultimately belong to the public. OCTA's actions at Cypress Shores should honestly be a warning about what happens when coastal armoring becomes the primary strategy for rail protection. That beach that was once walkable has now been reduced to nearly zero beach width, smothered and blocked by boulders. And as Mitch was saying, seawalls and rock revetments don't protect against erosion. They only continue to exacerbate that. And while some locations like Cypress Shores, there is unfortunately not enough beach left to support a nature-based solution, other areas like San Clemente State Beach or Area 4 still have an opportunity for a different approach. And independent coastal scientist Bob Battaglio of Coastal Futures determined that Area 4 currently meets the minimum threshold of beach width needed to support a vegetated dune system, and that additional sand placement could further solidify and strengthen that nature-based strategy. Yet, OCTA's emergency coastal development permit applications, there was the intention to replace the existing dunes with more hard armoring. And also just, repeating that one-time beach nourishment is not nearly sufficient enough to offset the ongoing sand loss and erosion that will be intensified by the hard armoring that's proposed in these plans. And while sand nourishment, we understand, is a complicated and expensive short-term fix, it is one of the better tools in our toolbox to maintain the beaches in this area. And this is one of the tools that the community consistently advocates for. These current proposals are just, again, that cycle of armoring and erosion that leads to increasingly costly interventions and emergency armoring that puts San Clemente's beaches and coastal access at risk. So, please don't allow what happened at Cypress Shores to become the blueprint for the rest of San Clemente. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Michaela. Appreciate that. Coming back to the Q&A, I want to take this one from Eric Holmes, who's saying, has elevating or adding trestles to the rail line to the Cotton's Point area ever been considered? Is that something, George, you might be able to help with, or Avi?
Yeah. So, Chris, it would be helpful if you could add a little bit more detail, because I'm not really understanding what he's meaning by elevating or adding trestles to the Cotton's Point.
Trestles, train trestles. So he's talking about raising the track.
Okay, so just putting it on a bridge, so to speak.
I believe that's the question. Yes.
And yeah, I mean, in terms of a long-term solution, maybe that's something that the state would look at. In terms of a short and midterm solution, very costly. Also, just trying to think right now off the cuff. You'd have to consider what would happen to the bluffs as well. because typically everything that the railroad does on the beach side in terms of protecting the railroad, it's also stabilizing the bluffs, and it's also protecting any other property that's on the bluff side as well. So it's going to take a lot of time and effort to evaluate this kind of a long bridge alternative. Plus, another big thing would be maintenance access and operating access to whatever bridge structure you would create. And when it's such a long viaduct, being in a very high seismic area, how do you access a train maybe that is stranded over this long trestle in either seismic events or other emergencies, fire life access issues, and things like that. So I think it could be studied, but probably more potentially as a long-term solution.
Thank you, George. One more from the Q&A. We have a question from an anonymous attendee who's asking, why has OCTA not engaged with the California Coastal Commission on sand sources that they have identified? Per a letter from them, it appears that OCTA is not engaging with one of the most important agencies as it relates to sand nourishment. Do you want to go ahead and take that for us, Rebecca?
Sure. So I just want to clarify, we have been very engaged with the California Coastal Commission, especially with what's going on with the emergency projects. And then as part of that, we have also provided them with periodic updates on where we're at with the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study as well. We are working very closely with them to ensure that that what we're doing is compliant with their requirements. And as far as sand goes, they are being kept apprised of the sand sources. There's several different sand sources that have been looked at and evaluated over the last couple of years, not just by OCTA, but other agencies as well. And we have made sure that we provide the California Coastal Commission with those updates. We also meet with them on a biweekly basis to have focused discussions on the different work that OCTA has been embarking on. And so I want to make it very clear that we are working very closely with them, and we have regular meetings where we provide status updates and get their feedback.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And one more here from the Q&A. Mike Golden is asking, why 30 years for this study? Is that a guesstimate for timeline to complete a realignment? Rebecca, would you mind picking that one up as well?
Sure, I can take it. And then George, if you have anything to add. I will say that the 30 years, because I don't even want to say the relocation study, the long-term solution study that the state is planning to commence at some point, we're not sure how long that could take, but we do know that any long-term solution is going to take a long time with the different environmental and permitting approvals that would be required for that, in addition to the time it takes to do the study itself. So with the 30 years, that's kind of like the engineering standard that we've placed. We want to make sure that whatever we put there ensures that the railroad is protected in place until the state completes its own study. We're not saying that study will take that long. We're not sure how long that would take, but regardless of how long that study does end up taking, whether it's a year, 2 years, 6 months, implementing it is going to take a long time, which is why it's necessary to ensure that we have the railroad protected in place to ensure the safety of passengers as well as rail operations until we get to that point. And George, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, it's really a matter of working your way backwards. Whenever you have such a large infrastructure project, be it, the study we're assuming is going to look at both maintaining the existing corridor as well as potentially looking at other corridors. So whichever direction this thing goes, it will be a sizable infrastructure project. And when you work your way backwards from, when it could be in operations, work backwards to the amount of time you need for construction, the amount of time you need for the engineering, the amount of time you need for the environmental clearance, and then probably another huge piece is the amount of time to secure funding. And that funding will be a mix of local, state, and federal funding for an infrastructure project of this magnitude. And so when you look at traditionally what mega projects of this size within Orange County, within San Diego County, within LA County, this takes a lot of time to coordinate all of these efforts. So that's why we're looking at that 30 years.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, George. Much appreciated. So that is going to close out our meeting at this point. If you weren't able to ask your question, please go ahead and you can email us. You can see our emails here, either Rebecca or me, or you can email to the study email, which is crrs@octa.net. Feel free to submit your comments that way. Please note the links in the chat that we have here. One is a direct link to the draft feasibility report, where you can find full, all the details about the criteria and matrix associated with that. We have additional information on the website you can take a look at, and feel free to reach out. We appreciate the time. We appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you very much.